Good afternoon. So we're back for a late afternoon installment of the House Government Operations and Military Affairs Committee here on Thursday, February 23rd. And we have with us former Representative Barbara Murphy. Thank you so much for joining us to offer your thoughts on H97.
You're welcome. Thanks for the invitation. I have to say, I haven't really been paying much attention to you guys the last 7 or 8 weeks, as I have felt it's not my job anymore. But this bill kind of caught my eye, and as I'm very happy to have the opportunity to give some information on it. How would you like me to start?
So we have been discussing, there are obviously a number of different elements of this bill, but we had heard committee members and folks in the building really interested in if we're going to change anything about the filing deadlines and the path to become a candidate as an independent, we should hear from someone who had the experience of being an independent candidate. So I primarily reached out to you and some other folks, and you were available and also have that, as you said, really deep ability to read in and look at the details. And so I thought your perspective would be a really solid one to offer that voice of someone who had the independent candidate experience. So would love for you to focus on how you feel the bill might change the experience, or in a positive or negative way, for an independent candidate. And if you have other thoughts on the bill, we're happy to hear those as well.
Wonderful. Well, I did take the hour I had to just read draft 2.1. So thank you for sharing that with me. And we'll try to reference sections as well as page and line numbers if I can. So just so that everybody's on the same version and looking at the same language. In my opinion, and with my experience as an independent candidate, section 1 and 2 of this bill impede voter choice. The primary is an election for the political parties to select their candidate to be on the general election ballot. The general election is for all voters to select from the full array of candidates the actual office holder. If an individual meets the filing requirements to be an independent candidate on the general election ballot, their eligibility should not be determined by whether they lost a party nomination or not. So I don't know if you'd like me to stop there and take any kind of reflections the committee might have, or if you'd like me to continue on to section 3 where the deadline's supposed to be.
I would say, unless someone has a burning question, that was pretty clear.
And I have to be fair. I mean, I'm not sure everyone always understands what an independent is. And they often think of Bernie Sanders and think of it as a party. And it really isn't. We each have foregone the support and the networking of a party to just be free to speak for our constituents, hopefully, potentially to speak for ourselves if we're self-serving. And I just like to put that out there and be clear about that when I speak to party, because for me, party is an affiliation, and it ties with it an obligation, but also benefits. So I've had to explain that a lot throughout my 4 campaigns, and the fact that the primary election is very different and has a different role and function than the general election.
In much of our committee's deliberation on this bill, the question about what does it mean to have the party or independent designation next to your name in the eyes of the voter. And we have had lots of different experiences. We've heard lots of different perspectives on that. I think yours is a valuable one. So thank you.
And also, just to be really clear, which I think I probably have already beat a dead horse here, but the independent next to your name disallows you from having anything else. Unlike, I mean, you could be a DPR, you could have all of the other 3, but if you choose to be an independent, you cannot carry any of them. And I, in my first election, won the Democratic nomination and tied the Republican in the primary and relinquished both and said, yes, I would relinquish the Republican if I was given it, because I could not carry the independent next to me if I took anything else.
So one of the things, if I could, Barbara, to clarify for folks that's been, as we've gone through the iterations of this bill, is that the scenario you mentioned where you file as an independent and then you also are then written in on the major party primary and then have the option to either accept that nomination or decline it and run as an independent. Nothing about our bill would prevent that from happening.
Correct. Yes, I was just trying to be clear that I think the bill does speak to carrying several designations of party affiliation and how they're prioritized, and that an independent can't have any.
Right.
So I did have concerns about section 3 as well. I don't understand the need to change those deadlines. Altering the filing deadline for an independent candidate to coincide with primary filers, I feel is inappropriate. That date is set to meet the necessary warning periods for the primary in August. The independent candidate's election is in November, the general election.
Any questions for? I have such a hard time not referring to you as Representative Murphy. It is really a challenge. You are always,
just go with honorable.
I don't know if you heard Representative Morgan, but you are always the Honorable Barbara Murphy.
Oh, that's dear. Actually, my fellow postal friends, because I worked in our post office before I ran, one of their digs at the beginning when I was looking to be successful was, oh my goodness, are we going to have to call you the Honorable?
Dishonorable. My mother said that to me.
Only if you stand for it. So I really do feel strongly about the, I don't understand changing that deadline. It doesn't make sense to me. I don't know why the Thursday before the primary isn't still sufficient.
So Representative Murphy, you have spoken quite clearly about the value that you have of the independent being separate from party affiliation, that an independent is truly eschewing party affiliation. And one of the reasons that this is in the bill is that I think other folks in the building, in elections, in the conversations about all of Vermont election policy over the years have struggled with this exact question, because I agree with you to an extent, but then the reality is that folks who who lose a major party primary or are in our current state are pretty sure, whether it's because of polling or whatever else, can then get an independent filing in, and then that makes it so that they sort of have another bite at the apple where they really are affiliated with a party but they just couldn't win the primary of their own party. And so that's the struggle I think that I was trying to resolve here by just saying at the beginning, whether you're truly an independent or you want to affiliate with a party, you file however you truly are, your authentic way you want to identify to voters, and then everybody just picks a lane and goes in that direction. So that was what I was putting on the table as the sort of lead drafter or lead sponsor of this committee bill. But I would love if you have any thoughts on sort of the rationale there. Don't want to put you on the spot, but.
No, I really appreciate you framing that, because I see it from the opposite perspective. You and I served for many years on a committee together, so I don't think that surprises you. I see it as the voters getting a chance to still elect a candidate that they support, even if they don't care to vote on that party's ballot. And it's on the party's shoulders. It behooves the party to determine how much of a support, et cetera, they're going to give a candidate who maybe votes with them, but isn't their member. I I don't see that it's really a problem for the party. I think the parties police that themselves. Again, I've never been a member of a party, so I can't speak to that, but that's my perspective is you folks hold the reins on what kind of financial and et cetera support you all give each other. And if I ran as an independent because I lost as the party's candidate, then I think it's kind of pushy of me to think that the party owes me anything.
Is there anything else you'd like to tell us about the bill?
Yeah.
Careful. I had a feeling there was.
Section 4. As a person who won 4 elections, in none of which was any money accepted, and in each of which less than $500 was spent, I'm concerned about increasing the amount of money in our election process. If this section remains, I recommend that B on page 3, line 3 and 4, include language to the effect of, quote, or on behalf of, as apparently the current practice permits, so that the candidate, not only is it directly from the candidate, but if someone makes a donation with my name in the note line, that counts as well toward any cap you're putting on donations per candidate. And the 10,000 boggles my mind. I'm sorry. I know it's outdated, but you know, I did run an election 3 years ago.
Not the intention to cap a whole source.
Yeah, so the challenge with understanding both the mechanics and the intent of this has been it's been large. So I think we have talked about this in the committee that my intention here was to make it so that instead of candidates following just the letter of the law and having folks donate on their behalf or through a PAC, recognizing that there's essentially unlimited money flowing into elections from a variety of different means in our post-Citizens United world. But the very legitimate concern about the original language that was in the early drafts was about unlimited from a candidate to a party. And there are a few candidates, I can think of a couple that have been mentioned that have, $1 million war chests that then could just sort of donate that whole thing to a party. So we put a cap that is enough that a candidate could raise money and say, I am helping to pay for the staff person, I'm giving it to the party. And the donation is transparent and captured in our campaign finance system. And we don't have to do this end run around for statewide candidates to participate in major parties, and that at least there's transparency as opposed to the current system that with a $10,000 cap between a candidate and a party, anybody who's running statewide is essentially raising money on behalf of the party with no real tracking of that information. And so that's where this part came from, and acknowledging that if it were up to me, we'd have publicly financed elections that were really tight, and money would be speech, and but we don't live in that world. And so this is one small way that we can provide a little bit more transparency in our statewide election campaign finance.
Well, I certainly know that it's well beyond any of us to correct this direction of this action. Mm-hmm. But I just think from what you had spoken to me earlier of your intent on this, that this isn't a full cap, that if it's just from the candidate, you can still do on behalf of through those PACs and through an individual donor, as you had said, it's happening now. So I just, again, suggest that if you're going to retain this and your intent is to put those limits in, you might want to add a little more language.
Yeah, I will definitely consider that. And what immediately comes to mind is it would be hard to enforce, but I don't want to get into a debate about it now. I'll definitely think about that comment. Representative Cooper, I think, had a question.
Former Representative Murphy, it was once said that you won a campaign on $17. Is that correct?
I not sure I ever spent quite that little. I think that was a senator from long ago, but but I never spent more than 500. And in my final campaign, when we weren't really campaigning, I spent $89.
Nice.
That was Senator Aiken.
Oh, was
Yeah.
it?
Yeah, it was a while back.
I feel honored that you would even think that was I, but.
I bet you could have done it with $14.
I bought an ad before the primary saying even though I wasn't on any ballot, I would be in the general election. That was my whole campaign purchase. So I also had comments on section 8 as well as section 11. So 8 and 9 kind of go together. On page 6, lines 9 and 10, as I read it, this exemption from the provision of contact and identifying data is much too broad. Section 9, line 19, references demographic. And if that could be defined and specified for both sections, I think if the intent is to limit race or gender profiling, I think that would do the task, because currently it reads that you don't even have to give your address or an email contact on that form, and that seems absurd.
We will ask Ledge Council. The intent of this language was to say we are asking the consent form to now have demographic data that it has not contained. So age, race, gender, that then those items, just those demographic items on the consent form, are entirely voluntary. So that the way that these sections play out, we don't want to require that a candidate has to provide their race, for instance. They don't have to put that down, but we're saying we want that information to be a question because we've heard pretty compelling testimony that it would help us understand the demographics of candidates running for office, how our representation evolved over time, et cetera. So that's the idea here. But I want to make sure we're being clear. Would you mind, Barbara, if I check in with our legislative counsel who's also on the Zoom here and see if
No, and as I said, I think that comes clear if you read 9, but section 8 basically says whether it has an address, an email, or anything else on it, it can be accepted. So I think it's section 8 especially that needs clarification, because it doesn't speak to demographic, which isn't defined, but is potentially shows some intent in section 9. So please, yeah, add Ledge Council to the conversation.
So that's a suggestion, Tim, I think on line 9, that instead of such information, that we specify the demographic information specifically, that we call out the age, race, gender, ethnicity.
That makes sense.
That I definitely think is a good catch. And you know what?
I heard I used to frustrate people.
We should be suspicious of any time it says such. Anytime it says such in any of our bills, that should be like a giant alarm bell. Thank you so much, Barbara. That's great.
Did Tim have other questions, or is that clear?
Nope, I've made a note to update that.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. And my final is really, I'm really feeling very strongly. Mike, could you say a word just so you come back on my screen?
Yes.
Thank
Here
you.
we are.
It's very hard to see you in the very tiny box. Section 11, I am so pleased that Representative Sibilia is in the room, because this, I am a novice at it. I don't have depth of understanding, except to say, in no way, shape, or form do I believe that the Vermont infrastructure is ready to support electronic ballot returns or processing. And it terrifies me that we would put this into language before that system is fully up and running with all our town clerks, et cetera, because we have spent so much money on aspects of electronic capabilities, and to put this out there before people are able to make links like I am right now is incredibly concerning.
Yeah, so if I can, Representative Murphy, we heard the distinction yesterday. I think Director Senning did a good job of saying there's a big difference between online voting and what we are calling here electronic ballot returns. You might be familiar with the assisted voting system that's used today to help Vermonters who have a disability vote, where it essentially will fill out the ballot for them, and it fills in the bubbles. And so they end up with a ballot expressing their vote that is indistinguishable from the other ballots. The problem that we're trying to solve in these sections around electronic returns, we heard some pretty compelling testimony that especially military overseas voters have a very difficult time getting access to a printer or being able to mail back ballots in time to be counted. And the technology here is entirely dependent on our paper system. So it preserves the lack of access to the internet of the actual voting material and the actual voting, the tabulation of votes. So it doesn't have anything to do with the tabulation of votes. It's entirely about the communication through a secure portal with identity verification, so that a person who today, an overseas voter, military service person, or a disabled Vermonter is able to return their ballot in this way. And it's only those folks who qualify under those federal rules that would be eligible for the electronic return. They are not casting their ballot electronically, but through the portal, they're expressing what they want on the ballot. The clerk receives that and then prints it in the same way that they do with the assisted voter system. So it is through the internet, but not on the internet, if that helps clarify that at all.
It does. And this is a capability that all town clerk offices currently have. All voting precincts, from the testimony we heard from the executive director, and I think he's on Zoom and might be able to illuminate this for the committee if we want to hear more, but all clerks, I believe, have to have under federal law the AVS available. Is that correct, Director Senning?
That is, yes. And access to the election management system via which these are transmitted.
That's great. That was my main concern, was that this was making first of all, putting a burden on a system that wasn't here yet, but also putting a burden on town clerk offices that potentially aren't capable. So it sounds like it's just making sure a system that's available is there for our military personnel that are overseas. And again, as a postal employee, I always felt badly if a ballot came into the PO box well after Election Day.
That's what we're trying to avoid. And I'd be happy, Ms. Murphy, to have a conversation with you at any time to fill you in more fully on how that system works.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Okay, well, Barbara, do you have any closing comments for us? We're going to take a quick breeze through just as a reminder before we take this up again tomorrow of what's actually left in the bill before we get out of here for the day.
I don't. I was happy not to have to shovel my Montpelier driveway out before I got into an early morning office. I had several cups of coffee before I shoveled my Fairfax driveway out.
Well, I really, really deeply appreciate you joining us and being so thoughtful in your comments on the bill on short notice. It was really valuable and always nice to hear from you.
Well, I hope it makes a difference. I hope that you do consider my thoughts, especially on changing the filing date and on the eligibility for independent status in a general election. I remind you again, the primary election isn't a piece of, it's for the party. It's not for the populace, and the general's for the populace.
We will definitely take your comments seriously. We've had some pretty serious discussions this morning on this bill and this afternoon, and we've got more to come. Your voice is a very respected one, so thank you for being here. So now I would like to take just a quick section by section. We decided to skip earlier today, and I want to make sure the committee, before we take this up again in the morning, is just aware of where do we end up today with the bill. So Tim, would you help just walk us through section by section which pieces are kind of here, if there's anything that we're making any tweaks on in the next drafts? Representative Murphy had a good catch on that one piece, and I think section 8. Just want to take a jog through.
Absolutely. For the record, my name is Tim Devlin, Legislative Counsel. Before you, you have draft number 2.1 of a strike all amendment to H97. And just kind of taking it from the top. First part is the sore loser provisions. This is 2 sections. Section 1 deals with nominations by party, while section 2 deals with independent candidates. And I think it's useful just to kind of read through the pertinent language here, as it kind of captures the essence of it. In no event shall a candidate who loses a major party be nominated to appear in the general election ballot by a committee of any party other than the party for which the candidate appeared on the primary ballot. And so that's the nomination by party committee. Independent candidates in section 2, similar language. A candidate who loses a major party primary for an office shall not appear in the general election ballot as an independent candidate for the same office for which the candidate lost in the primary election. I'll pause there for a moment.
I think we're good.
Okay. The next section has to do with independent candidate filing deadline. Section 3 introduces a new deadline, and that can be found in 17 VSA 2402 subdivision D1C, essentially moving forward the deadline to be the fourth Thursday after the first Monday in May. I'll pause there.
I think that is just aligning the independent filing deadline with the major party primary filing deadline.
Correct. The next section, the next part having to do with campaign finance limits on statewide candidates is only one section, section 4. And this was something that was added today. This is at the top of page 3. I'll just briefly state it again. A political party shall not accept contributions totaling more than $100,000 from a candidate. I'll pause there. Okay.
Good.
The next part pertains to biennial committee reorganization reports, and this is just one section, section 5. And let's see here. I think it might just be easy just to read the inserted language. At the same time of filing the certificate of organization, the chair and secretary shall file with the Secretary of State a single machine-readable electronic document containing a list of names and addresses of the town and county committee members from those towns and counties that have organized pursuant to this chapter. Pause there. Okay. The next part pertains to nominee parties printed on ballots. And this is, again, one section, and this is the Title 17 VSA Section 2474, Choice of Party. We were discussing this earlier today, and I'm just trying to think if we have not updated any language since the last draft here, but in essence, this just dictates the order of which political primary nominations or wins are presented or on the ballot for the general election. I'll pause there.
Looks like we're good.
Okay. The next part pertains to candidate demographic information. This is 3 sections. Sections 7 and 8 deal with primary elections, while section 9 deals with local elections and town meeting elections in particular. As we were just discussing, in essence, this requires new information to be proffered by candidates, in particular, gender, age, race, or ethnicity. Those are the new categories, and it is voluntary. It is not required to proffer that information.
So the issue Representative Murphy flagged was that this could be read to say that none of the other information, the name, the address, all the stuff you need to put on there to be a real candidate. We don't want to also say that that information is voluntary while we're trying to capture that the demographic information is voluntary. So we'll make sure that's crystal clear.
Yes, and I propose we'll start with section 8. If I may, I can read subsection B1 as potentially altered. It would read, the candidate shall set forth the candidate's name as the candidate wishes to have it printed on the ballot, the candidate's gender, age, race, or ethnicity, town of residence, correct mailing address, and email address. A candidate who does not provide information pertaining to gender, age, race, or ethnicity may still appear on the ballot if all other requirements are met.
Excellent. That sounds like we'll take a look at it tomorrow.
Okay.
That sounds.
Also, the term, moving on to section 9, on line 20, the sentence currently reads, the town clerk shall not be required to ask the candidate for demographic information if it's not provided in the consent form. If there is any worry about the term demographic information being too vague, we could change that to the town clerk shall not be required to ask the candidate for information pertaining to gender, age, race, or ethnicity if it is not provided on the consent form.
Oh, boy.
Is it the intent
Representative Hooper.
for this demographic information to remain with the clerks or the Secretary of State's as opposed to public?
If it's provided, it will be public.
Okay.
So that's really key for people to know on these provisions. And I know we haven't really focused on this week, but that is the crux of why it was so important to make it voluntary, because if the information's out there, it will be public. So if we require it on the consent form, it's a matter of public record. It's going to be public.
The intent is not to publish it. It's intent to be.
Yeah, the intent is not to the intent is to aggregate data about who's running for office and how the diversity of representation changes over time. But the effect could definitely be, and we heard some concern about this, I want to be very upfront about it, that it could be used to say, I want to know who, all of the candidates who identify as Black are. And you can make a list of all of the candidates who identify as Black. And that could be problematic. And that was a very real concern that was brought up. On the flip side of that is having access to how people identify and how our elected officials and the people that choose to run change over time. So that's the thing to weigh in the balance. Representative Bloomley, I think, did a great job of describing how passionate folks who want this language and want us to start tracking who our elected officials are. And that's a really legitimate desire, but it doesn't come without the side of it being public, which is why it's so important that it's voluntary. Representative.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I'm sorry I had to scoot out for a minute, and maybe you've already talked about this, but you say it's voluntary, but is there anywhere on the form where it's going to say that it's voluntary?
I'd be open to requiring a statement to that effect, if that sounds like it would be an improvement. So Tim, when we come back tomorrow on this, could we, and I want to ask Director Senning too about the logistics of this, but could we add something that the consent form or, well, let me ask Director Senning, does it make sense to have the instructions? Because I think they're in a package where the instructions are on a sheet and then the consent form just follows it. So I'm wondering what the best way to clearly say to a candidate, these pieces are totally voluntary.
I mean, I can assure you we would, especially put that into the instructions part of the form. But I'm also, it's entirely up to the committee, amenable to you requiring it to say that on the form itself. You know, I'd put a little asterisk that said optional.
Yeah,
whatever the committee might desire, but I would certainly put it in the instructions, and I'd probably do that on the form anyway too, whether you told me to or not. While I have the mic, can I make one clarifying point though, Mr.
Yes,
Chair?
please.
These two sections here, section 8 and section 7 before it, are in the context of the primary petitions. So your offices and up, and that's why I actually am really happy that Ms. Murphy pointed out that sentence. We do want to be very clear about what does and does not need to be provided on those consent forms in order to be on the ballot. Whereas section 9 is where we're getting the information about local offices. And this section is not actually a filing section for candidacies. This is, if you can blur your eyes and take away the new language and what's there, it's just a one sentence standing requirement in the local election statute that the clerks report the names and address of their select board members to us. So this is a post-election reporting that they do. We send out a survey to all of the towns. And if you think about it, a lot of the towns, some of the towns at least elect their officers from the floor and may not have a consent form from them in the first place. So the clerk just kind of goes out and gathers the information from, who's my 3-member board right now? I need to get their name and address and send it to the Secretary of State's office. So it's not, I would also suggest that while and if we're tweaking these, we may tweak the language about not provided on the consent form to just not provided by the office holder to the clerk. However, that collection of information is happening by the clerk.
Representative Higley.
Yeah, if I could just follow up again, I think I appreciate the asterisks on the form itself, which I think would be certainly helpful and informative. But I also had mentioned this before that if it's not voluntary, which if it's not mandatory, which I'm glad it isn't, I don't think that you're going to get accurate information that you're looking for. Again, if you only have 50% of folks to fill it out, I really think you're missing the point. If that's what they're looking for some statistical purpose, I don't think you're going to get it with a voluntary form like this. That's another reason that I don't even think it's necessary. Just a comment.
I think what we heard in testimony was that, and I think what I assume and what the folks who advocated for this to be in the bill assumed was that if the question is asked, most candidates would feel comfortable providing that information and would fill it out. And so you'd have a pretty high rate of people self-identifying their gender and ethnicity. But I think that the concern that some candidates wouldn't want to, we wanted to leave that as an option. So it's that thing of, I think the data will be useful. It would have a pretty high rate of people volunteering that information. But if it's, if we put it on there. I don't know what the harm would be, and if it ends up not being a useful stat, we can come back and say, we'll take those pieces off the form.
I mean, it's sort of this statistical, like, well, opt-ins, at least, that's right.
Yeah.
So,
All right. Representative Waters Evans.
I'm sorry if we went over this already. You know I can't help myself. I'm so sorry. Okay, not really. I'm lying when I say I'm sorry. On page 6, on line 19, it says, shall not be required to ask the candidate for demographic, but that should have the word information after it.
He actually read that when he said that, but
Oh, okay. I wasn't sure if we had picked up on that or not. Carry on. Thank you.
Tim was typing faster than he was.
On the fly,
it's just
right?
time to hear him say it. Yeah.
We've been through a few drafts. Thank you, Shay. Representative Waters Evans.
Both are fine. Thank you.
All right.
Okay. Let's see. The next part, and we're at the top of page 7 now, pertains to write-in candidate minimum thresholds in primary elections. This is highlighted because it reflects a change from the last draft that the committee reviewed. And this removed, let's see, that one kind of circular old reference to an old subsection A that has been removed, and the subdivisions have been renumbered for clarity. It also includes a reversion of what had been struck out text in the second half of the sentence, which is now A2 on lines 10 through 12, that now reappears with one modification to use gender neutral language, replacing he or she with the candidate.
That hit your issue, Representative?
I am just that eye catcher yesterday was addressed. Thank you.
Awesome.
Okay. The next section having to do with electronic ballot returns is an item that was discussed at length yesterday. This is 2 sections. Section 11 allows a digital certificate and then a digital version of the certification. And section 12 is the substance of the enabling of electronic ballot returns via the portal established and maintained by the Secretary of State's office. And there are no changes to this language. And that brings us to the effective date, section 13, which has not changed either, but places the bill to take effect on July 1st, 2023.
So if there were the first elections that this would apply to, would most likely be if there were special elections in November of 2023, but really municipal elections and the presidential primary in 2024 are kind of the first big ones, right?
That sounds right to me, but I would want probably Director Setting to weigh in on that.
Yeah. Thanks.
Nodding in agreement.
That's right. And there shouldn't be many this fall. So it's really the next annual meetings and pres primary next year.
All right. Thank you, Tim, for walking us through the bill. I know we've had a long day, but we'll have a short one with legislative work tomorrow. So I want to kind of make sure we're ready to do that work. So just for a few minutes here with the committee, I wanted to specifically ask to take the committee's temperature. When we started this bill and I worked on language and took feedback from different stakeholders and have since listened to some of the feedback from in and outside of the room and come to this draft of the bill. One of the key guiding principles for me was to try to make it so that folks, to use the expression, pick a lane, right? So if I want candidates to tell voters who they are, be authentic about that, have the thing that's printed on the ballot match something of our open primaries. The independent filing deadline is a thing that it vexes me a little bit. So in this bill, I have envisioned, and it's been in all of the drafts, this idea that we would have everybody, start on the same date. You file your candidacy, choose to be an I, or choose to run in one of the party primaries. So I just wanted to take the committee's temperature on that particular aspect, because I think that was the crux of especially former Representative Murphy's testimony, was around the independent filing deadline. And I think there are a variety of opinions about that. And so I want to at least have a discussion before we ask Tim to do a draft for tomorrow. So Representative Higley.
Well, if you want me to start it off, I still don't support the sore loser provision in the bill currently.
Okay. That's fair. I think Representative Hooper may have had trouble hearing you, Representative Higley.
I don't support the current provisions on the sore loser piece of the bill.
Same thing with Brett Murphy.
I agree with Representative Murphy, previous Representative.
Representative Chase.
I see the filing as less a service to the parties or whatever, and more service to the residents of Vermont, so they know who's going to be running, and they can, do whatever research they need between then and November. But
yeah,
I'm looking at it like it's not. I don't see it as for the parties or for the state or whatever. I see it as for the voters, so they have the information.
Representative Hooper.
I fundamentally agree with that, but I think it places an undue burden on the independent to make a decision and encumber to some degree earlier than you are party candidates, and sort of like an equal protection thing. If I'm only obliged to do it 10 days before a certain date, then all of a sudden we're telling somebody that's not going to be up for actual election until 30, 60, 90, whatever days later, has to do something different. That's a little uncomfortable. And secondly, I'm wrestling with the idea of the demographic information not necessarily being discoverable, but being attributable. A lot of the surveys, you take your demographic information as separate from the actual survey. You don't get to say, oh, look, here's Representative Higley. See where he lives, see what he does. I'm not entirely sure on that information that is coagulated, that your address and things like that is out there anyway, but the more it's out there, the easier it is to discover. Those are mine. A couple of.
Yeah, so are you specifically concerned? So the new piece is the demographic piece, right? Because we all file, as candidates, we file those consent forms, and that, I've downloaded that list of filed candidates so many times. I probably have 50 different versions of the one from this last year on my computer right now. Because it's got all this useful information. Like I know where to mail a thank you card to somebody like that. So yeah, Representative Hooper, is it specifically about the demographic pieces, or is it about all of the candidate information being out there?
Just the demographic pieces, and I think you just give Representative Chase a clue as to why your computer is going around in circles.
Representative Waters Evans.
I mean, I tried to articulate this earlier, and I think Ms. Murphy actually just really explained well how I was feeling about it, which is that when she said a primary election is for a party, the very nature of being an independent is that there is no party. So to require an independent to file in line with these party dates seems to me fundamentally contrary to the nature of being an independent, which is that they have one election and that election is in November. That is what I was trying to say earlier, but she really said what I was trying to say in a much more succinct way.
Okay. Representative Murphy.
I'm good with what we have.
So,
But Tim has been doing some good work for us. Thank you, Tim.
Poor Tim.
I appreciate that very much, Representative Murphy. So I guess what I have struggled with my feelings about the independent candidate filing deadline, because there's a part of me that says, I think Representative Chase was getting at this, it's helpful to the voter to know who's running. And I don't know how well it serves to have folks sort of get another bite at the apple in our current system. But if we're saying that if you're appearing on one of these major party primary ballots and you lose, you can't be on the general election ballot, I'm less concerned about the independent filing deadline as it pertains to people sort of communicating what they're really trying to get at with their affiliations. So I guess, could I take a straw poll of the committee of if would you prefer to keep the independent filing deadline the way it is and take that piece out? So
Yes.
And take which piece?
So just take the independent filing deadline alignment with the major party filing out and just leave the independent filing deadline the way it is. Would folks prefer we do that? So if you do prefer we do that, could you raise your hand and let me know so I get a sentence of the committee? Okay. All right. So I will strike that piece from the bill because it's not core to what we're trying to do here. And I think other pieces accomplish the main thrust of things. Representative Hango.
Is that section 3, just for my knowledge?
Yeah.
That is section 3. Tim, would striking that have any impact on the other sections? Are there any striking that change?
I don't think so. Director Sending, do you see anything? I don't. Okay.
C. That was pretty specific.
So we'll work on this some more tomorrow. Is there anything anybody's burning to get out on the table before we back up in the morning? Thank you so much for all the work today. I really appreciate it. And I do think that on our domestic violence fatality commission bill, there is a compromise in the works that we should know about tomorrow, but we'll take action on that next week, hopefully. Looking forward to our field trip tomorrow afternoon. We'll work out the carpool